Welcome to my world, where America loves progress, but Americans hate change. For the last 30 years, I've been involved as a former mayor, an employee for a Fortune 500 company, and a consultant for the last 20 plus years, helping mitigate that crossroads between change and status quo attitudes. And it's not just in the development space, it's just about in every facet of our politics and public policy, federal, state, and local level. And so you see that the contradictions of we want economic development, we want a fair tax base, we want more jobs, but we don't want to have it built in our backyard. We don't want it to change our quality of life. And that's where the politics and policy is born out of, is those conflicts between progress and the fear of change. And so that's why we have the DMZ here. I'm Patrick Slevin, your host, where we can take a pause and be in a neutral space to understand the dynamics of the not in my backyard phenomena and how it affects not only our economy, but really our everyday lives and our quality of lives. And so for like I said, the 30 years I've been in this space as an elected official and as a consultant, speaker, author of 2 books on the subject matter, it's not going to stop. In fact, it's getting worse as technology is getting more advanced. When I started off as mayor of Safety Harbor in 1996 at 27 years old down in the Tampa Bay area, it just took one upset citizen with an AOL email account to mobilize dozens of people, sometimes hundreds, not necessarily in my city, but in other communities, to come to City Hall and to create political anxieties for elected officials. And then as technology evolved, we got to Blackberries and laptops and now smartphones and Facebook and change.org and Nextdoor. Uh, it's become more prolific, right? And just looking at data center space and how there's hundreds and hundreds of local opposition groups that have merged together, coalesced, and scaled to go against not just one hyperscaler, but the whole industry. And you juxtapose that over the last 30 years on what developers are doing, or more importantly, what they're not doing. And that's been the whole conventional thinking of flying under the radar. Even before I was elected in 1996, that was the business model: fly under the radar, hire your lawyer and your engineer and planners, and present the facts, and everything else will take care of itself. We don't have to worry about third parties. And they would get zapped at a public hearing. They'd turn into Jerry Springer episodes, if you're old enough to remember that talk show, where it just became a crap show, right? And so over those 30 years, as the opposition has gotten more sophisticated, more integrated, syndicated even, developers are still pretty much understanding that, let's just try to fly under the radar and not draw attention to ourselves. Now, there's more and more that understand that there is a community engagement component and that they have to go in and do something, right? But typically it's usually too little, too late, or it's just arbitrary, right? It's just token. And so this episode, I want to share with you the 3 key questions that I'm asked as a consultant and a speaker in dealing with and addressing this NIMBY factor that is costing industries trillions of dollars in losses and delays and defeats. And so let's jump into it. The first question that I'm asked is, Patrick, why are good projects getting defeated, right? What happens that we have a sustainable project? It's going to have a good, tax revenue base for the community. It's going to create good jobs, permanent jobs, the good construction jobs, and there's also a good community benefits package. And so the answer is multiple. There's multiple answers, but they all come together where a developer ignores the third parties and just concentrates on the legal, logical, and linear aspects of the application, while ignoring the threats and the risk of the political, emotional, and the chaotic components that we see from local opposition. Or they do come into a community, but they think a town hall meeting is the greatest way to introduce the project. And if you've been doing this for a while, these town halls just become media spectacles, if not worse. And so you don't have any narrative there, and the media now takes that spectacle and turns it into a negative crisis for you. Also, the facts just don't carry the water when you're trying to counter and mitigate the emotional fear and loss that the opposition, and the opposition can be a number of different folks. It could be homeowners that heard something on the grapevine. It could be special interest groups that have members paying them, so they have to have a cause and a reason to oppose a sustainable project. Or it can be competitors, that are fueling front groups, to protect their market share. There's all those dynamics in play, which the DMZ and my NIMBY war room will delve more into as time goes on. But the answer is basically you need to show up, and you haven't. Not you specifically listening, but the general you of the developer industries, commercial, residential, industrial, mixed use. It really doesn't matter. If you got a good project, you need to go into the communities. And that leads to my second question that I'm asking. Oh, Slevin, all right, we want to get into the community. When should we do that? When should we start doing our community engagement and the other facets of stakeholder outreach? And my answer is typically 6 to 9 months. It really depends on what sector you're in, how big the project is, or how small. But usually 6 to 9 months is a sweet spot. And what that does, it allows you to do strategic siting to begin with. Understanding what the history of that property is, right, and also the reputation and or liabilities of the seller or the person you're leasing it from. That usually is overlooked, as well as any kind of opposition research. Has there been other Facebook groups in the past? Has there been opposition for that property or for a project that's similar to yours in the general area? Chances are, if so, the opposition hasn't gone away. They can always come back for your project, and that's better to know it months ahead of time than learning about it in real time at your planning and zoning board, right? And so, 6 to 9 months, get in there, shake hands, look people in the eye, and talk about the merits of your project, answer the hard questions, and have a dialogue. And what comes out of that is you have intelligence, right? You have intel about the elected officials and how they vote. You should also do some political assessments too. Look at their voting record and any comments they made that are germane to maybe your project. You have all this intelligence and relationship building, and it gives you a better sense of the chessboard and the pieces that you need to put on there and how you move them. And so community engagement, 6 to 9 months, sets you up to put your full toolbox together to where you have a project website, you have frequently asked questions that are not just generic, but really specific to the concerns and the needs of the community. The third question is what's the secret here? What's the secret, Slevin? What's your secret sauce? How do you win the NIMBY battles? And how does the NIMBY war room really apply? Well, it begins and ends with one word, and the word is conflict. You have to understand that opposition, this not in my backyard force, cannot exist and cannot threaten your project without conflict. Conflict is the grease to the political skids. And what that does is it attacks and diminishes your credibility, first and foremost, right? Because if you can't be trusted in what you're saying, then their Google science will do the job. this misinformation and disinformation that goes through the digital grapevines and goes through all the different Facebook posts, they have credibility because you lost yours. And coupled with, if you didn't go into the community sooner, then you really have no narrative or say in the matter. And now you're fighting, fighting for votes at the hearings, which is too little too late. Also, looking at that conflict is understanding that now the elected officials have to make difficult decisions, based on this conflict, and there's no cover, and so that conflict translates into negative media. It translates into clickbait for the Facebook pages and so forth. And so understanding that your good project's not going to necessarily carry the day just by the facts, understanding that you need to shake hands and establish your reputation and relationships sooner than later, and understanding that conflict is coming after your project. If you're able to string that together and understand that it's better to expect opposition, and it doesn't happen, be surprised by that, versus you don't think it's happening, then you get a deer in the headlights at a public hearing. You have now more command over the destiny and outcome of your projects. Now, there's more to it than that, but that's really the core. Those three questions and those answers give you a competitive edge that most don't have. And keep this in mind as we wind down this episode in the DMZ. This is not about defeating the opposition, right? Yes, they're a factor. It's part of our republic, our representative form of government. Their voices are heard, need to be heard and respected, even if they're out of town. That's another conversation. But still, there's a third party component to the public participation and application process, right? The archaic notice and hearing process. But understanding that you can now create the political cover, but more importantly, the confidence for these elected officials, to make difficult decisions, especially in election year, on a good project that's going to benefit the entire community, not just be reactive to a couple hundred people that are less than 1% of the population. And so stick with the DMZ here. Subscribe if you're seeing this on the YouTube channel. I'm going to have guests on all sides of this progress versus the fear of change. I look forward to having developers, consultants, academics, even the opposition, if they want to come on. I want to hear their perspectives too, because we're in the DMZ and there's a battle going on. There's a war really going on, and we're on these front lines. And so by having these conversations and these episodes, my goal is for us to have a better understanding so we can have a better community, and we continue to progress as a nation. Thank you for watching, and look forward to seeing you next time.